Day that must have been for Jesus. What a day. You probably don't realize it, but the story that we have in the gospel today takes place at the very end of a day. And that day actually in our church life began last week, before dawn, when Jesus decided that he needed to be alone. Jesus had heard terrible news. He had heard that John the Baptist had been beheaded by Herod Antipas, the one who was ruling over Galilee. And Jesus was concerned. He was especially concerned about the fact that Herod Antipas saw him, Jesus, as someone also that needed to be taken care of. And so he wanted to be on his own. He wanted to get away. He needed some space. And so, early in the morning, he took the boat that the disciples had, and by himself he set out on the Sea of Galilee, heading towards an area where he knew there would be nobody there. And so he navigated that boat to the shoreline, and as he got to the shoreline later that morning, lo and behold, there were people there. There were 5,000 men plus women and children. A lot of people. Jesus was not going to be alone. And so he was in a very difficult situation. What do you do? Get back in the boat? Head out once more? That was not true to Jesus' character. Jesus saw the people there, and he did what he always did. He decided to have compassion on them and reach out to them. And so he went about with those 5,000 men plus women and children. Could have been as many as 20,000 people there gathered on the hillside. He spent the whole day going around, person to person, family to family, reaching out to them, caring for them, healing them, curing their diseases, changing their lives forever. Because that's what Jesus did. He needed to be alone, but he was obviously not going to be alone, and so he did what his Father wanted him to do. He reached out to the people with healing and grace. And then as the day grew on, and the disciples had joined him at that point, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "Well, it's been a long day. Why don't you send them out now? Send them home. There's no place here where they can get any food, and they're going to be hungry." And Jesus looked at the crowd and said, "Give them something to eat." And they said, "We don't have anything here but a few loaves of bread and some fish. That's it. And how many people?" But anyway, Jesus took the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He lifted it up towards his Father. He prayed over that. And then he said, he gave it to his disciples. He said, "Feed the people." And they went out there and they fed 5,000 men plus women and children. And when they were all done, they took up an offering. And they filled 12 baskets with leftovers. You know the story. What a day it must have been for Jesus. An exhausting day. I can't imagine what it would be like. Just doing a few church services like this for me gets a little bit tiring. I can't imagine what it must have been like for Jesus as he came to the end of that day. But there he was. He did the very thing that he had to do. And finally, he realized that he would have his chance. But this time he was smart. He said to the disciples, "Get in the boat!" And so the disciples got in the boat. And they set out from shore. And then he himself sent the crowds back to where they came from. And finally now, as the day was coming toward an end, he must have been totally exhausted. Jesus finally had that opportunity he had been longing for when morning began. He could be alone with his Father. and pray. What did the future have in store for him? Was he going to be like John, his cousin, and have his head cut off? Or should he take off to safety and go to some place where he could be by, in safety and security of another surrounding? He prayed. When he was done praying, and it must have been in the early morning hours, Jesus came down the mountain, and he realized that there was a storm going on. It was quite common on the Sea of Galilee. These storms would kind of whip up suddenly, and there would be big waves, and there'd be a lot of wind, and a lot of tumult. And he looked out towards the sea, and lo and behold, there's the boat with his disciples, all 12 of them in the boat. And they were afraid. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. They could have easily drowned. In fact, Jesus had been with them on a similar occasion earlier, in which he himself was on the boat, sleeping, of course, and they were terrified. Well, that's how they were now. But this time, they were even more terrified because Jesus was not with them. And so Jesus decided, I've got to do something about this. And he started going out to help his disciples. In order to do that, he had to walk on the water. Now, we don't know how he walked on the water. There are some so-called scholars and so on who try to come up with explanations of how someone can walk on water. And maybe there is some theory that would explain it all. We don't know. But Jesus was going out to rescue his disciples because they mattered to him. But when they saw him, they said, "It's a ghost," and they were terrified. And Jesus said to them, "Take heart. Don't be afraid. It's me. It is I. I am," he said. And that I am is the name of God himself. And so Jesus reached out to those disciples in order to give them comfort and confidence and to restore their trust in him. Peter, realizing who it was, shouted out to Jesus and said, "Lord, if it's really you, command me and I'll come out to you on the water." And Jesus, one word says, "Come." And lo and behold, Peter stepped out of the boat. And he was able to stand on the water. And he took a step or two, and he began to feel that wind blowing against him. He began to feel the waves coming towards him, and he started to panic. And at that moment, then he cried out to Jesus, "Lord, save me!" And Jesus was there, reached out to him, grabbed him by the arm, and brought him into the boat safely. And the moment they got into the boat, the wind stopped, and the waves settled down. What are we to make of this story? It is such an extraordinary tale. Something happened there on the Sea of Galilee that night. We'll probably never know this side of heaven for sure. But in order to understand it, we need to ask the question, how did people understand that story when they heard it back in the days in which it was first being told? When Matthew was writing his gospel, he decided that he would include Peter in the story for the people of the Jewish Christian community that he was reaching out to. And so he gave them good news. And the good news was this, that while there may be all kinds of persecution coming toward you from all angles, and while you might be afraid of what's going to happen to you as followers of Jesus, you need not fear. Because Jesus is still with you. The risen Lord is with you. And he will be there for you. And when you cry out to him, he will reach out and save you. For us in the 21st century, the same message speaks to our hearts. Because we're living in very dangerous times. This has been a crazy week, as we all know. with all the threats and dangers and fear of a nuclear holocaust being promoted, and then the sheer craziness of what happened yesterday in Virginia, it would be impossible for people not to be concerned or afraid or anxious. But Jesus says, take heart. It is I. I am with you. Do not be afraid. And as for that story about Peter, Matthew is the only one that tells the story of Peter getting out of the boat. The other Gospels don't mention Peter at all. But Matthew tells that story, and I have a hunch why. Because he wanted us to know that even if you have just a little faith, just a little faith, like Peter, that's enough to get you going. Because there were 12 disciples in that boat. And while we might be critical of Peter because he began to sink, you need to remember the other 11 didn't even take a step. Peter had a little faith, and Jesus said if you have as much faith as a mustard seed, you can say to the mountain, be cast into the sea, and it'll happen. As God's people today, in the 21st century, we need to be willing to ask ourselves the question, if we have little faith, what are we doing with it? What are we doing with it? One preacher put it this way, he said, the reason so many people don't have much faith today is because they're not doing anything that really requires any faith. And there are wonderful and important and necessary things that need to be done in this world by you and by me as people of God. And the Holy Spirit in our hearts has given us enough faith so that we might have the courage, like Peter, to step out of the boat and to let God do the rest. Jesus trampled waves just as the book of Job had predicted many centuries before. He walked on the water. And Jesus had his own victory at sea. Amen.